The small rural town nestled in the countryside was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least they thought they did. The tight-knit community was the kind of place where life moved slowly, and people lived simple lives. On the outskirts of town, hidden behind tall, thick trees and a long dirt road, was a farm. To the people in the town, it was just another plot of land with a man who kept to himself, a little on the heavier side, with a rough exterior but no need for anyone's attention. Most mornings, the farmer would rise before the sun, his large hands gripping the steering wheel of a weathered truck as he made his way to the field. His routine was predictable: feed the animals, check the crops, fix the barn, and repeat. He never seemed to have much to say to anyone. A few people in town would wave as they drove by, but the farmer rarely waved back. He wasn't rude, just distant. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, strong, quiet, and always focused on his work. Or maybe it was the fact that his size, a little heavier than most men, seemed to keep people from asking too many questions. There was one thing, though, that made the farmer stand out. Despite his quiet demeanor, there was an air about him, a kind of mystery. People didn't know much about him. No one knew how long he'd been living there or where he came from. His name was on the deed to the farm, but his history? That was a different story. Some of the townspeople would talk about him. A few speculated that he might be hiding something. Maybe it was the way he carried himself so confidently, or how he never seemed to need anyone. His clothing was simple: old denim jeans, a faded t-shirt, and work boots. But there was something about the way he moved, the way he looked at things with such intent focus. It was like he knew exactly what he was doing, and that bothered people. People like to feel like they understand the world around them, and when they don't, it makes them uncomfortable. For the most part, the farmer was content to be left alone. He enjoyed the solitude that came with living on a farm, the simplicity of growing crops, feeding animals, and watching the sun set behind the fields every evening. He had everything he needed: his animals, his land, and his work. What more could he ask for? But not everyone saw it that way. It started with a group of people, a small circle of individuals who had nothing better to do than gossip. They would gather at the local diner, a greasy spoon where the air always smelled of coffee and eggs, and talk about the farmer. No one ever really dared approach him. They thought of him as an enigma, someone who didn't belong in their town. Maybe it was because of his size, the way his presence commanded attention without ever asking for it. Or maybe it was simply because they didn't understand why someone like him would choose to live in a place like that. The circle was made up of a few of the town's more curious residents, some of them just bored with their own lives, others with their own secrets. The group consisted of people who spent their days analyzing others' lives instead of paying attention to their own. And the farmer became their latest subject of interest. They watched him for weeks, observing his habits from the comfort of their vehicles as they drove past his farm. They never got too close. It wasn't like they were spying, at least not in their eyes, but there was something about him that fascinated them. He was always alone. He never seemed to talk to anyone, never made friends. He never even seemed to leave the farm. One afternoon, as the farmer was walking down the long, dusty path that led to the barn, a couple of the circle's members pulled up in a truck, slowing to a crawl as they neared him. The driver, a man with a thick mustache, rolled down his window and leaned out. "Hey there," he called out, his voice loud enough to carry across the field. The farmer stopped and glanced over, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem surprised or irritated, just indifferent. He tilted his head slightly, waiting for the stranger to continue. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said, still leaning out the window. "But we've been wondering about you, you know. You don't talk to many people around here." The farmer didn't answer right away. He just looked at them with quiet, steady eyes. "We were just curious." "You've been living here for a while now, haven't you?" the man asked, his voice softening, as if trying to make the conversation feel more casual. The farmer nodded slowly, still not offering much in the way of a response. "We don't see you out much," the man continued, now looking around at the farm. "It's a beautiful place. You ever think about selling some of this land?" The farmer finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "I'm not interested in selling." The man blinked, surprised by the quick answer. He wasn't sure how to keep the conversation going. He had assumed the farmer would be more open to small talk, maybe even invite them to sit for a drink. But the farmer wasn't interested in that. He was clear. He wasn't a man of many words. "All right then," the man said awkwardly, rolling the window back up. "We'll let you be." The farmer nodded again and continued walking toward the barn without saying another word. As the truck pulled away, the circle members exchanged glances. "He's strange, don't you think?" the woman in the passenger seat remarked, her voice filled with curiosity. "I don't know," the man replied, still watching the farmer disappear into the distance. "Something about him doesn't sit right. I don't trust people who keep to themselves like that." Back in town, their conversation became the talk of the diner. People didn't quite know what to make of the farmer. He wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't warm either. He was just there, existing. And for some reason that bothered people. They liked things they could understand, things they could explain. But the farmer? He was an enigma. For the next few weeks, the circle kept an eye on him. They made sure to pass by his farm, sometimes slowing down to catch a glimpse of him. They never spoke to him again, but they were always watching. The more they observed, the more they began to wonder about his past. Some whispered that he was hiding something. Maybe he had come to the town to escape something. Others speculated that he might be involved in shady dealings, using his farm as a cover. There were even rumors that he was dangerous. Just the way he carried himself made people uneasy. Still, no one dared approach him again, at least not directly. But that didn't stop the rumors from spreading. The circle didn't know much about the farmer's past, but they were determined to find out. And every time they drove past his farm, the mystery only deepened. The circle, a group of small-town people with too much curiosity and too much time on their hands, didn't know what to make of the farmer. He had lived on his farm for years, and yet there was still so much they didn't understand about him. The more they observed him, the more they became convinced that there was something odd about him. Their curiosity grew each day. They couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important about this man, a secret, perhaps, that he was hiding. They had started with small questions, trying to get closer to him without raising suspicion, but the farmer remained distant. He wasn't rude, just quiet, and didn't seem to care much about their presence. This only made the circle more determined to figure him out. One afternoon, a few of them decided it was time to take a more direct approach. After all, they had seen him work day in and day out, and he never seemed to leave the farm. There was a gap in their knowledge, and it bothered them. Why had he chosen to live in this small town, so far away from the hustle and bustle of the city? Why didn't he interact with anyone? A few days later, one of the circle's members, a man named Tom, drove out to the farm. He had been the one to approach the farmer that first time, and he felt like he had to try again. He believed that the farmer might open up if given the right opportunity. So Tom found himself standing at the end of the dirt path that led to the farmhouse, staring at the tall gates that protected the land. The farm, with its aging barns and wide open fields, looked more like something out of a dream than a place anyone would want to escape to. Tom took a deep breath and walked toward the house, feeling more nervous than he expected. As he neared the farmhouse, he could see the farmer in the distance, carrying a bucket of water to one of the animals. His large frame moved steadily, as if there was nothing in the world that could distract him from his work. Tom approached cautiously, trying not to make any sudden movements. "Hey there," Tom called out, raising a hand. The farmer looked up but didn't say anything at first. There was a brief silence, and for a moment Tom wasn't sure if the farmer would respond at all. Then, with a slow and deliberate movement, the farmer nodded. "What can I do for you?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. I just wanted to talk," Tom said, struggling to find the right words. "You don't come around town much. People talk, you know. We were just curious about you." The farmer's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment Tom wondered if he had said the wrong thing. But the farmer simply set the bucket down, his movements smooth and measured, as though nothing in the world could hurry him. "There's not much to talk about," the farmer replied, his gaze never leaving Tom's face. "I work my land. That's all there is to it." Tom felt awkward, unsure of how to proceed. He had hoped for more of an invitation into the farmer's life, but instead he was met with a simple and direct answer. The silence stretched between them, and Tom found himself grasping for something to say. "We were just wondering. What brought you here? It seems like such a quiet place for someone like you," Tom said, trying to keep the conversation light. "Don't you get lonely living out here by yourself?" The farmer glanced around, almost as if the question itself had caught him off guard. He didn't immediately answer. Instead, he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes scanning the horizon as though he was deciding whether or not he should share anything more. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the farmer spoke. "I'm not lonely," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I like the quiet. I've always liked being alone. Keeps things simple." Tom nodded, trying to read the farmer's expression, but it was difficult. The farmer wasn't giving away anything, and it made Tom wonder if he was just wasting his time. But something about the way the farmer spoke, the quiet confidence in his words, made Tom feel that maybe there was more to this man than met the eye. "Well, all right then," Tom said, stepping back. "We just wanted to say hi. Maybe we'll see you around." The farmer didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just turned and walked back to the animals, leaving Tom standing in the dirt watching him go. Tom wasn't sure if he had learned anything at all. It felt like the farmer had given him just enough to keep him curious, but not enough to answer the questions that had been building in his mind. As Tom made his way back to his truck, he felt a strange sense of unease. The farmer wasn't like anyone he had ever met before. There was something about him, something in the way he carried himself that made him feel both at ease and on edge at the same time. It was as if the farmer was holding something back, but Tom couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Tom didn't realize it, but his visit had set something in motion. The circle had been watching the farmer for weeks, trying to uncover more about his life, and now they were more determined than ever. They needed to know why he had chosen to live in this small town, what his background was, and why he never seemed to interact with anyone. They knew there had to be more to the story. In the days that followed, the circle became more creative in their efforts to learn about the farmer. Some of them drove past the farm more frequently, slowing down just enough to catch a glimpse of him working. Others made casual inquiries around town, asking about his past, his family, and any details they could find. But no one seemed to know anything. It was as though the farmer had appeared out of nowhere, and no one had any idea about his life before the farm. And then, one day the circle got a break. A neighbor, a woman who had lived in the area for years, remembered something that might help. She had seen the farmer a few months ago, long before anyone had started paying attention to him. She recalled seeing him walk into a local diner late one evening, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't order much, just a coffee, she thought. But she remembered the way he carried himself. There was something about the way he sat at the booth, quiet but alert, like he was sizing up the world around him. The woman didn't think much of it at the time. But now, with all the talk in town, she realized it might be important. So she shared the story with the circle. They were thrilled. It wasn't much, but it was something. The idea that the farmer had been in the diner sparked new questions. Why would a man like him walk into a small-town diner at night? Was he just passing through, or had he been there longer than anyone knew? The circle's curiosity only deepened. They started asking around more, trying to piece together the story of the man who had moved onto the farm. They had no idea how far the answers would take them, or what they would uncover about the farmer's past. But one thing was certain: they were getting closer, and they weren't going to stop until they found out the truth. The circle had become increasingly restless. What started as a small group of people intrigued by the farmer's solitude had now turned into an obsession. Every passing day, the mystery surrounding the farmer seemed to grow bigger. They had learned very little about his past, and the more they tried to dig, the more they realized how little they actually knew. It was frustrating, but it was also exciting. The idea that the farmer had something to hide, something big, had consumed them. One afternoon, the circle decided to take another step in their plan. They needed to learn more about the farmer's past, about where he had come from and why he had chosen such a quiet, secluded life. Someone needed to get close to him, someone who could ask the right questions without raising suspicion. They needed to know if there was a reason the farmer kept to himself, or if he was simply content with living alone. It was Tom who decided to take matters into his own hands once again. He had already approached the farmer once, and although the conversation had been brief, he felt like there was still a way in. Tom was the type of person who liked to think things through. He wasn't the most outgoing member of the circle, but he was patient, and if anyone could get the farmer to open up, it was him. So the next day, Tom drove to the farm again, but this time he wasn't just passing by. He parked his truck at the end of the dirt path, far enough that the farmer wouldn't immediately notice him. He wanted to observe first, see if there was anything out of the ordinary. He sat in his truck for a while, watching the farmer as he worked. The man was doing what he always did, feeding the animals, checking the fences, tending to the crops. There was nothing special about it. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, but then something caught Tom's eye. From his vantage point, he could see the farmer moving in and out of a small shed behind the barn. He went in, carrying a heavy box, and came out a few minutes later empty-handed. Tom watched curiously. He had seen that shed before, but he had never really paid much attention to it. There was nothing remarkable about it. But today the farmer's actions seemed different. The way he moved, the way he carried the box, it all seemed deliberate. And Tom couldn't help but wonder what was inside that shed. After a few more minutes of observing, Tom decided it was time to approach again. He had been there long enough to see that the farmer was finishing up his day's work. This might be his best chance. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he felt that something was off. Something about the way the farmer had acted when he was in the shed had sparked a sense of urgency in him. Tom got out of the truck and began walking toward the barn. His steps were slow and deliberate, but his heart was racing. He knew this wasn't just a casual visit. This was about uncovering something bigger. He approached the barn carefully, keeping an eye on the farmer in case he noticed him. The farmer looked up just as Tom reached the barn. There was no surprise in his expression, no anger, just the same calm demeanor. "What's up?" the farmer asked, his voice as steady as ever. Tom felt a flicker of uncertainty, but he pushed it down. "I was wondering if you needed any help with anything," he said, his voice casual. "I'm in the area, thought I'd stop by." The farmer stared at him for a moment, sizing him up. Tom felt like he was being judged, but there was no hostility in the farmer's gaze. After a long pause, the farmer nodded. "I'm fine," he said, his tone polite but firm. "But thanks for offering." Tom hesitated, wondering if he should press further. He had to be careful. The farmer didn't seem like someone who would just open up to anyone. But there had to be a way in. "All right, well, if you change your mind," Tom said, still trying to sound friendly, "I'll be around. You know where to find me." The farmer gave a small nod, then turned and began walking toward the shed again. Tom watched him for a few moments, then decided to leave. He didn't want to push too hard, not yet. As he made his way back to his truck, Tom's mind was racing. Something about today felt different. He had gotten closer, but he still didn't know what the farmer was hiding. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important inside that shed, something that would explain why the farmer was so isolated. A few days later, Tom shared his observations with the circle. They were intrigued by what he had seen, but they all agreed that they needed to be more strategic. The farmer wasn't going to give up his secret so easily. It was time for a new approach. One of the members of the circle, a woman named Carla, suggested that they learn more about the farmer's background. They needed to find out where he came from and if anyone in town knew anything about him. It was a simple plan, but it could provide the answers they were looking for. Carla made some calls to a few people she knew, asking if they had any information about the farmer. One of her contacts mentioned that they had seen a man who looked like the farmer at a local veterans event a few years ago. The man had been alone, but he seemed to know people there. Carla's contact didn't remember much else, but it was a lead. The farmer had been at a veterans event. This could be the key they had been looking for. The circle decided to dig deeper. They started talking to people who had attended the event, trying to gather more information. Some people remembered seeing a large man at the event, but no one could say much else. It was as though the farmer had always been a shadow in the background, present but never the center of attention. Then one day, the breakthrough came. A man who had attended the event remembered the farmer's name. It wasn't a name that anyone in town had heard of before, and it didn't match the name on the deed to the farm. It was a name that seemed to belong to someone else, someone with a past that no one could have guessed. The farmer wasn't just any ordinary man. He wasn't just a farmer who had decided to live a quiet life in a small town. No, this man had a history that until now had remained hidden. The circle was stunned. They had never suspected that the man they had been watching so closely was someone with such a complex past. The idea that he had been part of something much bigger than this small town filled them with even more curiosity. They had no idea how much their lives were about to change, but they knew one thing for sure: they were on the verge of uncovering something big. The moment the circle learned the farmer's name, They knew things were about to change. The name, once just a whisper among the few who had attended that veterans event, now seemed like a key to a door they had been trying to open for weeks. The man they had been watching wasn't just a reclusive farmer. He was someone with a past that might be more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. The information felt like a revelation, but it also came with a sense of dread. What were they about to uncover? What had they gotten themselves into? The circle knew they had to learn more. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore. There was a sense of urgency in the air, an unspoken understanding that they couldn't back out now. They had started down this path and there was no turning back. The farmer's past, whatever it was no longer a mystery. It was a puzzle that had to be solved. The next few days were spent gathering information. They spoke to more people who had attended the veterans event, each conversation revealing just a little more about the man they had been following. The farmer wasn't just anyone who had served. He had been a Navy SEAL, a part of an elite force that few people knew anything about. It was a surprise to everyone, especially to those who had believed the farmer was just an ordinary man living a simple life. The realization hit hard. The farmer had been trained in ways that most people could never understand. His strength, his calmness, the way he moved, everything about him now made sense. He had been a warrior, a part of something bigger than anyone could imagine. But why was he here in this small town living alone on a farm? What had happened to him after his time in the Navy? The circle could only guess. Tom, who had been the most involved in the investigation, found himself more and more fascinated by the farmer's past. He couldn't stop thinking about it. How had this man, who had been part of such an intense and dangerous world, ended up in a place like this? And why did he seem so determined to keep his past hidden? Tom drove by the farm again, feeling an odd mix of curiosity and apprehension. The farmer was out in the fields, as usual, tending to his crops. He seemed unaware of the growing attention he was receiving. It was the same routine every day. He worked quietly, alone, as if he had no cares in the world. But Tom knew that wasn't true. There had to be something beneath the surface, something that had brought the farmer to this point in his life. As Tom watched the farmer, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe it was time to approach him again. This time, however, it wouldn't be just about casual conversation. Tom needed answers. He needed to understand why the farmer had chosen to live in isolation, far from the life he had once known. Tom parked his truck at the end of the dirt path, just like before, and waited for the right moment. The farmer didn't notice him at first, but eventually he looked up and saw Tom standing there. There was no surprise in his eyes, just that same calm, steady gaze. Tom took a deep breath and walked over to him, his step slow and deliberate. The farmer didn't say anything at first. It was almost as if he knew exactly what was coming. "Hey," Tom said, trying to sound casual. "I've been thinking a lot about you lately." The farmer looked up from his work, his expression unchanged. "What about me?" Tom hesitated. This wasn't going to be easy. He had to be careful, but he had already gone too far to back down now. "I heard you were at a veterans event a few years ago," Tom said. "I didn't know you had a military background. I didn't know you were a Navy SEAL." The farmer's face remained impassive, but Tom could see a slight shift in his posture. He wasn't angry, just wary. "That's in the past," the farmer replied quietly. "I don't talk about it." Tom nodded, trying to keep the conversation going. "I understand," he said, though he wasn't sure he did. "But people talk, you know? They're curious about you, about why you're here." The farmer glanced around the field, his eyes scanning the horizon. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as though considering whether or not he should say more. Finally, he spoke. "I came here for peace," he said, his voice low but steady. "That's all I want." Tom felt a pang of guilt. He had pushed too hard, too fast. He could see that the farmer wasn't ready to share his story. But there was something in his eyes, a quiet sadness perhaps, that made Tom think he wasn't being completely honest. There was more to the farmer's past than just wanting peace. "I get it," Tom said, his voice softer now. I think people around here need to understand you better. They don't mean any harm, you know? They're just curious." The farmer didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned and began walking back toward the barn slowly. Tom watched him go, but he didn't follow. He knew there was nothing more to be said. Not today, at least. As Tom drove away from the farm, he felt a strange sense of frustration. He had learned a little more, but not nearly enough. The farmer's words stuck with him. I came here for peace. It made sense in a way. After everything he must have gone through in the military, peace was probably what he needed most. But it didn't explain why he had chosen this place or why he refused to talk about his past. The next day, the circle gathered again, and Tom shared his conversation with them. There was a feeling of disappointment in the air. They hadn't gotten the answers they wanted. The farmer had said little, and Tom hadn't been able to push him further. "Maybe we're going about this the wrong way," Carla said, her voice thoughtful. "We're not going to get him to open up like this. He's too closed off. But we need to find another way to get answers." The circle agreed. It was clear that the farmer wasn't going to reveal anything unless he was ready. But that didn't mean they should stop. They needed a different approach. They needed to find out more about the man's past, and they had to do it without directly confronting him again. Over the next few days, the circle continued to search for answers. They went through old records, talked to people who had known the farmer years ago, and even tried to find out more about his time in the Navy. But it was as though his past had been carefully erased. There was little to be found. The more they dug, the more they realized how thoroughly the farmer had hidden his identity. It was almost as if he didn't want anyone to know who he really was. But one thing was clear. The farmer wasn't just a simple man trying to live a quiet life. He was someone with a history that, for reasons unknown, he was determined to keep buried. And the more the circle uncovered, the more they understood that they had only scratched the surface of something much deeper. As the days went by, the circle became increasingly obsessed with uncovering the truth. The farmer had always been a mystery, but now his past seemed like something they had to crack. The more they learned, the more they realized that their curiosity wasn't just about his past. It was about their own lives, too. The mystery of the farmer had drawn them in, and they couldn't turn back now. There was something about him that felt unfinished, like a story that needed an ending. Tom found himself going back to the farm again, even though he knew he wasn't getting the answers he wanted. The farmer was still as elusive as ever, but something in the air was different now. It was as though the calm that surrounded the farm had shifted, and Tom could feel it in his bones. The quiet wasn't just about the land or the work, it was about the man himself. There was a weight to the farmer's silence that spoke louder than words ever could. Tom stood at the edge of the field one afternoon, watching the farmer work. He noticed how the man's movements had become more deliberate, like he was preparing for something even if no one else could see it. The routine of the farm hadn't changed, but there was something brewing beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the land anymore. Tom could feel that the farmer was waiting for something, a moment perhaps, or maybe even a confrontation. And that moment came one late afternoon. Tom had spent most of the day at the diner with some of the other members of the circle, talking about their next steps. They all agreed that the best thing to do was to leave the farmer alone for a while, to give him space to make the first move, if he ever would. But by the time Tom drove to the farm that evening, he could tell something was off. The usual stillness of the place seemed different, charged with an energy he couldn't quite explain. As Tom parked his truck at the usual spot, he saw the farmer standing by the barn, his back to him. For a moment, Tom hesitated. There was something about the way the farmer stood, so still and yet so powerful, that made Tom pause. It was as if he was waiting for something, too. He didn't want to intrude, but at the same time he felt a pull, a need to finally understand what was going on in the farmer's mind. Without thinking, Tom walked towards him. "Hey there," Tom called, his voice carrying over the open fields. The farmer turned slowly, his eyes meeting Tom's. This time there was no unreadable look in his gaze. There was something in his eyes, a quiet intensity, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "Tom," the farmer said calmly, his voice steady but firm, "I've been waiting for you." Tom's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected those words, hadn't expected the farmer to acknowledge him in that way. It felt like everything had led up to this moment, the questions, the curiosity, the silence. And now it seemed like the farmer was finally ready to speak. "I figured you would come eventually," the farmer continued. "You've been watching me long enough." Tom nodded, his throat dry. He didn't know what to say, but he knew this was the moment that everything could change. "I'm sorry if I've made you feel uncomfortable," Tom said, his voice softer now. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy." The farmer shrugged as though it didn't matter. "Privacy's a luxury. Sometimes you don't have the option to keep it. Tom felt a chill at the farmer's words. It was like he had just cracked open a window into a world Tom could never fully understand. I've been trying to figure you out, Tom admitted. I thought I knew who you were, but the more I look, the more confused I get. The farmer didn't reply right away. Instead, he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. There was something in his expression now, something like an invitation or maybe even a challenge. You want to know who I am? The farmer asked, his voice low. You want to know why I'm here? Tom nodded, the words stuck in his throat. He had wanted to ask those questions for so long, but now that the moment had arrived, he wasn't sure he was ready for the answer. The farmer took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving Tom's. I came here to escape, he said simply. I came here to find peace, but not in the way you think. Tom's brow furrowed. Escape from what? The farmer hesitated, looking out at the fields for a moment as if the answer was buried in the earth itself. From the things I did, he said, almost in a whisper. From the things I had to become. I wasn't always a farmer. I wasn't always the man you see before you. Tom's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. But it was also a moment filled with more questions than answers. What do you mean? Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The farmer finally looked up, meeting Tom's gaze once again. This time his eyes were filled with something that felt like regret. I used to be a Navy SEAL. I've done things that I can't undo, things that are part of me now. I had to leave that life behind or it would have consumed me. Tom felt a shiver run down his spine. He had never expected this. Never imagined that the farmer's past could be so complex, so filled with darkness. He had thought he was just dealing with a quiet man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone, but now he realized that there was so much more beneath the surface. I thought coming here would give me a fresh start, the farmer continued, his voice softer now. But peace is a hard thing to find when you've been through the things I've been through. Tom stood there in silence, the weight of the farmer's words sinking in. He had been so focused on the farmer's isolation, his silence, that he had never considered the possibility that the man was running from something deep and painful. I didn't know, Tom said quietly, feeling a mix of guilt and understanding. I never knew. The farmer gave a small nod. No one does. That's the way I wanted it. The past is something you bury if you can, but sometimes it has a way of finding you. Tom's heart sank. He had thought he was uncovering the truth, but now he realized that there was no simple answer. The farmer's life was a story of survival, of trying to rebuild after things that could never be undone. He wasn't just a man trying to escape his past, he was a man trying to find a way to live with it. I'm sorry, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. The farmer gave a small, rueful smile. Most people don't. There was a long pause between them. Tom didn't know what to say. There was so much he wanted to ask, so many questions he had been holding on to, but in that moment, he understood that the answers weren't going to come in the way he expected. The farmer wasn't a puzzle to be solved, he was a man with a past. And that past was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. I didn't come here to hurt anyone, the farmer said finally, his voice steady once again. I just wanted to live in peace. To find a way to be normal again, Tom nodded. I understand. And for the first time, Tom truly did. The two men stood there for a long while in the fading light of the evening, both of them lost in their thoughts. It was a quiet moment, but in that silence everything had changed. Tom knew that he couldn't keep digging into the farmer's past. He had learned what he needed to know. The mystery was no longer about finding answers. It was about respecting the man's need for peace. The farmer's past was his own, and it was up to him whether or not he wanted to share it with the world. Tom had learned more than he expected, and that knowledge left him with a deep sense of respect. As Tom turned to leave, he glanced back at the farmer one last time. The man stood there, his back to the field, looking like someone who had finally come to terms with his past. There was a quiet strength in his posture, a strength that came not from hiding away, but from living with the things that couldn't be erased. Tom didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The farmer's story had been told in his own way, and now Tom knew that it was time to let him live in the peace he had so long sought. After that evening, Tom didn't visit the farm for several days. The weight of the conversation lingered with him, and he knew that things had changed both for him and the farmer. He had learned more than he ever expected to, but he also understood the farmer's need for privacy and peace. He realized that the questions he had been chasing weren't as important as they seemed. Sometimes, it was enough to simply know that someone had a past, a story, and the right to keep it to themselves. But despite his understanding, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the farmer's past was far from over. The man had said he was trying to escape, but Tom wondered if anyone could ever truly escape from their past. The weight of the things he had done, the things that had shaped him, couldn't just be forgotten. Maybe the farmer hadn't found peace yet. Maybe he was still fighting battles inside himself that no one else could see. Tom continued with his daily life, but the memory of the farmer stayed with him. He found himself looking out the window at the long stretch of road that led to the farm, wondering what the farmer was doing. Was he still working the fields? Had he made any progress in his quest for peace? Or was he still haunted by the things he had done? A few weeks passed and Tom heard a rumor from one of the circle members. It wasn't much, just a passing comment from someone who had seen the farmer in town. The farmer had been in the local store, but this time he wasn't alone. He was with a woman. The rumor piqued Tom's curiosity. The farmer had never seemed to show any interest in anyone, not since he had moved to the farm. He kept to himself, isolated. The idea that he had been with someone who wasn't part of the town, felt like a new piece to the puzzle. Who was this woman? What did she mean to the farmer? Tom couldn't help but wonder if the woman was connected to the past the farmer had tried so hard to bury. Maybe she knew something about him, something that no one else did. Or maybe she was just someone he had met along the way, someone who understood him in a way that others couldn't. After hearing the rumor, Tom decided to pay the farm another visit. It had been a while since he last spoke to the farmer, and despite everything, he felt like there was more to be said. Maybe the farmer would open up more now. Maybe he would share something else, something that had been weighing on him. Tom wasn't sure what he was hoping for, but something told him this visit might be different. As he approached the farm, Tom noticed a car parked by the side of the road, one that he hadn't seen before. It was a small sedan, neat and well-maintained, parked just off the main path leading to the barn. Tom's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the woman from the store? He parked his truck a little further down the road and walked quietly toward the house. The barn was in view, but the farmer was nowhere to be seen. He walked a little further and saw the door to the farmhouse slightly ajar. Without thinking, he approached the door. "Hello," Tom called out softly, not wanting to startle anyone inside. For a moment, there was no answer, but then he heard a voice. "Just a minute," the farmer called back. Tom froze for a moment, uncertain of how to react. He had expected to find the farmer alone, but the presence of the woman, the car, made everything feel different. Was the farmer truly ready to open up, or was he keeping something hidden? The door opened slowly, and there stood the farmer. This time, though, there was something different in his expression. It wasn't the guarded, distant look that Tom had grown used to. The farmer looked softer somehow. "Tom," the farmer said, his voice calm, "what brings you here today?" Tom hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach this new dynamic. "I heard a bit of a rumor," he said carefully, "that you were in town. With someone." The farmer's face didn't betray any emotion, but Tom noticed a slight flicker in his eyes. The farmer stepped outside, leaving the door slightly open behind him. "Is that so?" the farmer said. "People talk, don't they?" Tom nodded, trying to gauge the situation. "I didn't mean to intrude. I thought I'd check in, see how you're doing." The farmer looked out over the field, his gaze distant. "I'm fine, just busy." Tom's curiosity got the better of him. "Who's the woman?" The farmer turned back to him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Her name is Olivia," he said. "She's someone I used to know, a long time ago." Tom felt a lump in his throat. There was something in the farmer's voice, something that hinted at history, a story that had been left unsaid for years. "She came to visit," the farmer continued, his voice steady. "She knew me from before, from when I wasn't here. We talked about a lot of things. It's complicated." Tom nodded, not pushing the matter further. He could tell that this wasn't something the farmer wanted to discuss in detail, but there was a part of him that was relieved. The farmer wasn't entirely alone. He had someone in his life, even if only for a short time. The idea that he had someone to talk to, someone who knew him from before, felt like a small victory, a sign that the farmer wasn't as isolated as he had seemed. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Tom said, stepping back a little. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." The farmer didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave Tom a long look. It was as if he was weighing something in his mind, deciding whether or not to share more. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer. "It's been a long time since I've let anyone in," the farmer said. "A long time since I've trusted anyone enough to talk about everything, but Olivia, she's different. She understands some things. I'm not ready to share everything with her, but it's a start." Tom didn't know what to say. The farmer's words carried a weight that made him pause. He had been right all along. The farmer wasn't just running from something. He was trying to rebuild, reconnect. "I understand," Tom said, his voice sincere. "I won't bother you anymore. I just wanted to make sure you had someone to talk to. That's all." The farmer nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it." Tom stood there for a moment, unsure of how to end the conversation. But the farmer had already turned back to the door, his hand resting on the handle. "Take care of yourself," the farmer said quietly, before disappearing back inside. As Tom walked back to his truck, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The farmer wasn't alone. He had someone, and that was more than enough. Tom didn't need to know all the details. Sometimes it was enough to simply know that a person was trying, that they were finding their way forward no matter how slowly. Tom drove back to town, the weight of the farmer's words lingering in his mind. The circle would want to know what had happened, but for once, Tom wasn't sure he wanted to share everything. Some things were better left between the two of them. The farmer was finding his peace, and that was all that mattered now. Days passed, and life in the small town slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The circle had been curious about the farmer's new visitor, the woman named Olivia, but Tom kept the details to himself. He had seen a side of the farmer that no one else had, a side that was raw and human, and he wasn't sure if it was his place to share it. The farmer was finding his way, reconnecting with a past that no one else truly understood. That was something private, something that didn't need to be shared or dissected. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The farmer's past, though painful, was part of who he was. It shaped everything about him, from the way he moved to the way he spoke. But there was something else, too. The calm, the quiet strength, the way he seemed to handle the world without ever letting it consume him. It was as if he had learned to survive not just by physical strength, but by controlling the storms inside himself. One evening, Tom decided to take a different route home. He had driven by the farm several times, but this time he felt the pull to stop. He wanted to see if the farmer was doing all right. He wasn't planning on staying long. Just a quick check-in, a simple hello. He was curious to see how the farmer was adjusting to having Olivia back in his life. But more than that, he wanted to understand where the farmer was now in his journey. When Tom arrived at the farm, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the field. The barn doors were open and the farmer was inside, tending to his animals. He looked peaceful, calm. For a moment, Tom just watched from the edge of the field. There was something about the way the farmer moved that made everything around him seem still, like the world had slowed down for a while. Tom walked toward the barn, making sure his footsteps weren't too loud. He didn't want to startle the farmer, who was so absorbed in his work. As he got closer, the farmer turned, his eyes meeting Tom's. There was a quiet recognition in the farmer's gaze, and for the first time, Tom didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like someone who was, if not fully trusted, at least acknowledged. "Evening," the farmer said, his voice steady but warm. "Didn't expect to see you today." Tom smiled, stepping closer to the barn. "Just thought I'd drop by. See how you're doing." The farmer nodded, wiping his hands on his pants before offering Tom a simple handshake. "I'm good. Things have been peaceful." Tom couldn't help but notice how the farmer's posture had shifted since their last conversation. There was something different in the way he held himself, less burdened, perhaps, as if the weight of the past had lightened a little. He wasn't the same man Tom had first met, the one who seemed to be running from something. Now there was a quiet assurance in his movements, a confidence that hadn't been there before. "Olivia's been coming around a lot more lately," the farmer said casually, almost as if he were stating a fact. "She's been helpful, actually. It's good to have someone around, someone who knows, understands things." Tom nodded, sensing that there was more to this than the farmer was willing to say. But he didn't push. He had learned that with the farmer, Things were better left unsaid until the time was right. "I'm glad you're finding some peace," Tom said, his voice sincere. "You deserve it." The farmer paused for a moment, his expression softening. "I've learned that peace isn't something you find. It's something you make," he said quietly. "I'm still working on it, but I'm getting there." Tom felt the weight of the farmer's words settle between them. It was as if he had just shared something more personal, something that went beyond the simple act of living alone on a farm. The farmer wasn't just trying to escape the past, he was learning to live with it, to find a way to coexist with the things he had done and the man he had become. "I know it's not easy," Tom said, his voice gentle, "but you're not alone, you know. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." The farmer gave a small nod, but his eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "I appreciate that, but sometimes it's better to just let things be," Tom understood. Sometimes words weren't enough. Sometimes the only thing that could bring peace was time, and time, it seemed, was exactly what the farmer needed. There was a long pause, and for a while neither of them spoke. The sound of the animals in the barn, the wind rustling through the trees, filled the silence. It was peaceful in its own way. "So what's next for you?" Tom asked after a while, not really expecting an answer but wanting to break the silence. The farmer took a deep breath, looking out across the fields. "Next," he repeated. "I'm not sure. I guess I'm just going to keep going." "One day at a time," Tom nodded, feeling the weight of those words. One day at a time. That was how the farmer was living now. Not rushing, not looking for something beyond what was in front of him. And that, Tom realized, was a kind of strength. The strength to let go of the past and face each new day, no matter what it brought. "I think that's all anyone can do," Tom said finally. The farmer turned to him then, his eyes locking with Tom's. "You know, when I first got here, I thought I was done," the farmer said, his voice a little softer now. "I thought I was running away from everything, trying to leave it all behind. But it's not about running. It's about learning how to live with it, and sometimes that's harder than anything else." Tom didn't say anything. He simply stood there, taking in the farmer's words. He hadn't realized just how much the man had been carrying inside of him. The weight of his past, the choices he had made, it was all there, shaping who he was. But now he was trying to find his way back, trying to build something new from the pieces of his life. "I think you're doing great," Tom said after a moment. "You've come a long way." The farmer gave a small smile, a faint flicker of appreciation in his eyes. "Thanks, Tom. I'm not sure if I'm doing great, but I'm trying." They stood there for a while longer, the quiet of the evening settling around them. There was no rush, no need for words. For the first time, Tom felt like he understood the farmer, not just the man on the farm, but the person behind the silence, the person who had lived a life that no one else could fully understand. As the sky began to darken, Tom realized it was time to leave. He had come to check on the farmer, to see how he was doing, and now he knew that the farmer was on his way to finding the peace he had been searching for. It wasn't going to happen all at once. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt. But the farmer had made the decision to move forward, and that in itself was a victory. "Well, I'll let you get back to it," Tom said, stepping away from the barn. The farmer nodded. "Take care, Tom, and thanks again." Tom turned and walked toward his truck, feeling a sense of contentment settle over him. The farmer didn't need to say much. The way he lived, the quiet strength he exuded, said everything that words never could. As Tom drove away, he glanced back at the farm, the lights from the house glowing softly in the distance. The farmer was still there, still moving forward, still building his life piece by piece. And for the first time, Tom knew that the farmer had found something that most people spent their whole lives searching for: peace.